Today's topic is climate change and cities. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be with you once again. And today I have with me a distinguished economist and colleague, Vijay Jagannathan, former IAS, former World Bank, currently World Resources Institute, and now about to move on to a higher level than that. So let's hear from Vijay.
Thank you very much, Subodh, and thank you for the kind introduction. Just to let you all know that apart from what Subodh mentioned, I'm also Secretary General of CityNet, which is a network of cities and partner agencies in the Asia-Pacific region. And also, I've been honored to have been invited by the Secretary General of the United Nations to join a high-level panel on zero waste policies, which he's planning to champion in the next few years. So I wanted to briefly touch upon the issue of climate and cities, because as we all know, there's been a huge amount of messaging in the media, particularly at the national level, about climate change and how it affects various parts of the world. And in many of these debates and discussions, it has become a bit of a north-south issue. That is, the countries of the north, which have really created the stock of carbon, which is now affecting the climate of the entire world. Well, the cities of the south, the countries of the south say that you created the stock of carbon, therefore there should be a greater responsibility on the costs of removing the carbon.
While Vijay, just a second. Let me explain to the viewers what stock of carbon means. It's the carbon that has accumulated in the atmosphere over decades and maybe centuries. That's the stock of carbon that we are talking about.
Thank you, Subodh. Yes, it began with the Industrial Revolution, what is called the first Industrial Revolution. And after that, we've been basically using fossil fuels to power the entire world economy. That has created this huge stock of carbon in the stratosphere, which is creating climate change. Now, the countries of what are called the global north are, however, arguing that the countries of the global south actually have a responsibility, because this is where the cities of tomorrow are going to be built, where there is a huge amount of economic activity. So it's important for them to take the right measures of not adding more carbon, but rather reducing it. So basically, it boils down to the fact that everyone agrees, and now we all feel the impacts of climate change wherever we are. Too much heat, too much rain, too much of typhoons, cyclones, hurricanes, and so on. I think everyone agrees that something is getting wrong with the way the world's climate is changing. And the big issue is, where's the money going to come from? If you are going to make the change, the big issue is that how can we have what is called a just transition? Just meaning a fair transition, so that the global community, whether you're in the north or the south, it doesn't matter, everyone is not unfairly affected by the changes which are required. So having said that, let me quickly go to the topic, because I think one of the great opportunities for cities in the developing world is the fact that climate could actually be in your advantage. The talk about climate change, for the simple reason that many of the problems we face, I don't even have to mention it for those of you who are in whether you're in Delhi or Jakarta or Manila or anywhere, the big problem of pollution, air pollution, which is caused by the huge growth of automated automobiles and two-wheelers and so on. Air pollution is creating enormous problems, especially among young children. Asthma has become fairly common. That's one. Similarly, with water pollution too. And so overall, what we are seeing is that with rapid urbanization, there are lots and lots of local environmental problems which are now beginning to bite back. And we are seeing in country after country, there's a huge amount of effort being made to improve the air quality, to improve the quality of life in the cities and so on. So the interesting thing about climate is that because a lot of the current policies on climate are related to the energy we are using, the fossil fuels, anything we can do to basically replace fossil fuels with clean energy is obviously to the the general sort of betterment of our welfare or our health and our well-being, I would rather say, in any part of the world.
So
The
what you're
question,
saying is that if we stop using fossil fuels, we'll get a double whammy. We get local benefits and we get global benefits.
exactly. So what you put it well, that's exactly the point. So this talk about co-benefits, exactly like Subodh said, you can get local benefits, you can get global benefits. And the good news is that for the global benefit part, the global community is committed to raise the funding. So that's an important distinction, which is changing the entire sort of discussion and debate about economic development. Because until recently, basically, when you're looking at concessional aid coming to the poorer countries of the world, it was based on the fact that you had to do something for their local benefits in terms of reduction of poverty and improvement of quality of life and so on. But now this additional dimension saying that, by giving more concessional funding to the poorer countries, you can actually create a major global benefit is an important argument. And I think which all countries are committed to the fact that you have to do it. The real question is, where's the money going to come from? And how is the money going to be actually transferred to the poorer countries of the world? Now, I don't know how many of you have been following the news, but there was an important meeting on climate change held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt last year, the end of last year. And one of the pitches, in fact, there were two very interesting pitches being made there. One was by this a group of small islands in the West Indies, led by the Prime Minister of, I think, it's called Bridgetown Declaration, which basically said that the small islands are being affected by the rise of sea level. We need money. We need the huge amount of additional funding. And the other pitch, which was made by the Pakistan environment minister, was that after the huge floods they had in the Indus River, which in fact even now parts of Sindh are still underwater, they were making this point that the new kinds of disasters coming in, climate-related disasters, are beyond the economic capacity of a country, and there needs to be aid. So there's generally agreement that more money has to come. But the question is, if money is to come, it cannot be in the old model where basically the way the concessional funding was raised was that the richer countries of the world joined as a cooperative and created the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and African Development Bank and so on. And basically, collectively, they guaranteed the loans which these banks were taking from the market and then passing it on to the poorer countries of the world.
Okay, hang on, Vijay, just a second. Let me explain what you're saying to the people. Yeah. The World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc., they actually borrow money and then lend it to the countries. Okay, and the borrowing by these international institutions is in a way backed by the guarantee of the richer countries, though may not be 100% explicit. It's there. So this is the old model that you borrow the money. You're just like a bank. You borrow the money in the financial markets and you lend it to the countries, because many people don't know that's how the World Bank operates, that they think the World Bank has its own money. No, the World Bank actually borrows money. Sorry to interrupt, Vijay, but that's the old model.
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful. Now, this model has been working, but unfortunately, the amount of money available is hardly enough to meet the requirements of all the, the billions of people living in the what is called the global south. So there's been this talk that the only way to get the huge amounts of additional funding required for this transition of energy from fossil fuels to clean energy, which will require additional amount of money, big amounts of money coming in, has to be brought in by the markets through the financial markets, which actually has trillions of dollars of investable funds. In fact, if you look at it, what is interesting about the financial markets is that because many of these pension funds in countries like the US, Europe, and European countries and Japan, they have very large portfolios of money which they lend out with the idea of safeguarding the pensions of people who have either retired or going to retire in the future, but they are obviously looking for safe investment. They don't want to take any risk. Question is that these kinds of funds, whether it's from the pension funds or even by investors in the richer countries, can we bring it down to the poorer countries of the world? That's one of the big dilemmas facing all countries. Now, what we see then, and how all this comes together, is that when you look at a typical city, because a modern city is almost entirely powered by energy, either directly or indirectly, almost every sector has got a carbon footprint. Take, for
Yes.
example, transportation. Now, if you have earlier they were saying that yeah, diesel is a cheaper form than petrol, but diesel actually generates a lot of suspended particulate matters, and that's what creates a lot of the pollution there. Now, if you want to switch from a diesel bus to an electric bus, then there's an additional cost. And electric bus is a lot more expensive than a diesel bus, but of course you get great benefits. It's a much cleaner system, it's smoother, and also the quality inside the bus generally tends to be better because the design itself allows you to make it upgrade it a little bit. Similarly, if you want to go even further and say, no, I don't want a bus system, I want it to be a metro, well, that's even better, but then it's a lot more expensive. If you want an underground metro, it costs about $100 million for 1 kilometer. So you can imagine for a city of 10 million, how much is required and why it's so difficult to set up an integrated metro system which can take people off their cars and two-wheelers. So the point is that if you want to go for a higher quality of life in your city, taking the example of transportation, yes, you can do it, but someone has to find the money. And if it is not affordable, then the money has to come either from the national government, if they have the money in the budget, or it has to come from the international community. And as I was mentioning earlier, the money coming from these overseas development assistance like the World Bank, ADB, and so on is very, very limited. Yeah. So a city of 10 million may actually be requiring as much of infrastructure to set up a metro system like London or New York as you require it in a more advanced country, but the money is not there. So it comes down to the point that it's not affordable. There are what are called additional costs of trying to respond to climate, which has to be met. Now, the interesting thing is I just gave you an example of transport, but actually you can take any sector. You can take housing. Affordable housing, for example, is something which is a huge agenda in all our developing countries. Now, you can either build the housing using our old engineering models, or you can use it using the new construction materials which have a low amount of carbon embodied in them. But again, it costs more. The initial costs are more. But then the advantage is that the carbon footprint of the housing itself is less.
Yes.
And then if you were to combine that with the way the whole electrical system is designed, you could actually have a very energy efficient building, in fact, which can also be cooled and heated without using too much of fossil fuel based energy. So there are these technologies now giving us an enormous range of possibilities, but each then comes with a cost. And the question then is, which costs would make sense? Now, interesting in this, so you've got transport, you've got housing, you've got water, because what people don't very often realize is that a lot of the water in a city or even in irrigation has to be pumped, and there are very large costs. So just as a power plant may have about 30% of its cost because of water, water also has about 30% of its cost because of energy. Yeah. So these things are coming in each sector. Now, the only one, interestingly, where there is really a win-win for everyone is in waste. And the reason for that is that of course, we are all generating waste every day of our lives. But in developing countries, it's a little more complicated because most cities don't have a sewerage system. Most parts of the city are based on on-site sanitation or septic tanks. And then you also don't have the way the trash is taken out of the home. Usually the kitchen waste is mixed up with the plastic and the paper and so on, and it's collected by the city. Now, once you separate out the waste and you have the kitchen waste separated, and then if you also have a system of collecting, of systematizing the removal of the waste from the on-site sanitation systems, that is an important source of methane.
Yes.
Because both these have a lot of methane, and methane has 26 times the potency of carbon dioxide. Just imagine, instead of 1 ton of CO2, the price of 1 ton, you get 26 times the price because of methane. So when this methane is captured it could be captured in a wastewater treatment plant or in a landfill or whatever, that can be used to generate renewable energy. It can also be used to power the taxi fleet in a city, like what some cities in China have done through compressed natural gas. But essentially what it does is brings about a circularity in the whole system. So you're using whatever energy you had to actually create more energy, which is also clean.
So,
So these,
Vijay, let me just explain this a little bit more clearly because it's a positive news. Now, the waste that we generate actually decomposes. And when it decomposes, it releases both CO2 and methane. Now, methane is very deadly if we let it go into the atmosphere. It's much more deadly than CO2. But if we capture it, then we can burn it and we can generate electricity, and that is not now a use of that turns the methane into CO2 because it's burnt and then it's CO2. So we got electricity and we don't damage the global environment. And I've been involved in the landfill projects. We call these as landfill projects, capture the methane and turn it into electricity. It's a well-known technology. It's not something that's experimental. It's highly doable. That's what I want to emphasize, that it's highly doable.
yeah, and so what is interesting about this is that because of ongoing digital revolution, it's not only doable, but it has also become a more practical in even the poorest countries of the world. And the reason is fascinating, because what you find is that even the waste picker, or the person you'd call the kabadi wala, whoever in India, they all have, now everybody's got a mobile phone.
Yes.
Now, the result of that is that, and then sensors have become extremely cheap. So you can actually have a collection site where through sensors you can automatically see how much of the waste is collected. And then the payment can also be done automatically without any human being involved. So you bring in so many kilograms of waste, you get paid so much based on the price of the waste. And the price of the waste then is linked to the fact that methane has a very high price,
Right.
And that can attract the money into the whole system. So these are some of the interesting ideas. That's the reason why even the UN Secretary General has got into this thing, because the point which they're beginning to realize is to avoid this kind of unnecessary and wasteful debate between the global south and global north, and there's a lot of finger pointing going on. Instead of that, saying let's try and find a win-win, which can be really helpful for everyone.
Yeah.
And the numbers are absolutely astounding. I mean, the carbon footprint of different sectors are obviously different. You could have generation of electricity where you can save on carbon. You can have waste, capture of waste is another example. Now, these are two where the benefits, or the amount, the benefits to the users becomes not only very big, but it's also good for the global climate. It's truly a win-win for everyone. There is really no loser in that, because you get a cleaner environment and you also get the benefits for the climate. The big challenge, of course, is how do you make this thing work? How do you ensure it from local politics? As we all know, politics at a city level is more complicated than at a national level. And in many countries which go through the election cycle, it shouldn't fall a victim to a challenger coming in and accusing the old mayor of, doing the wrong things, or having, had some other motive behind it. So that's one of the big challenges, which is communicating the messages in such a way that everyone begins to appreciate that there are many win-win situations. And if we take the win-win situations and are able to convert it to models which is acceptable also to the financiers, it can work. And the amounts you're looking at can be fairly significant. If you think of a city of say 5 million population, which generates, let's say, 5 million would be generating about 8,000 tons of waste a day, out of which 50% would be the organic waste, which generates methane. So you're looking at 4,000, say 3 to 4,000 tons a day of the waste from which methane is captured, which is an enormous quantity. And then that can, attract this kind of climate funding. That's what we are going at.
So,
but I think,
are you going to, I mean, this it's very exciting, but I want to ask, are you going to tell the mayors, or how are you going to work this out? What's your role in this?
Well, so what first thing is that I think the one of the biggest challenges is to communicate the messages accurately, right?
Okay.
Because there's a danger of two things. One is that this is not something which is very easy. It's not that the money is going to flow in, and it can only flow in if they do their part of the deal well. Now, very often what happens is when we go into the win-win idea, everyone assumes that they are going to win right away. But no money is going to flow unless they have done their part of making sure that there's a guaranteed flow of waste into, I'm giving the example of zero waste, but can be for other sectors too. There's guaranteed amount, so many tons of organic waste is going to come every day, for which you have to separate the waste, you have to have the digital infrastructure, you have to also respect the fact that if you're bringing in a private operator of the plant, they expect a certain kind of business relationship.
Right.
So that's one. So the communication part and getting the political leaders, because at the end of the day, it will be caught in the local politics one way or another. Political leaders have to stake their reputation and say, I'm willing to do this. And because I see it good for the city, good for the climate and environment. So the first job is the communication strategy. We haven't even got to it right now. Question is, how do you do it? And I think an important part of it, as we saw in the case of some of the earlier campaigns, like I think the campaign against smoking is a very good example, where worldwide you found that, the pressure for reducing smoking, a lot of it came from the children, right? They came from schools and colleges. I remember when my son was in the primary school, they started telling him that, you'd better tell your dad not to smoke and so on. It creates that kind of a pressure.
Yes.
And here also we need that pressure from the social media, from people talking. That's one part. The second part is you've also got to get the investors to get comfortable with the idea, because this idea that you can actually capture a lot of the methane from the poorest cities of the world is something which a green investor sitting in New York or London has no idea about. In fact,
Right.
most of them don't even want to go near there. They are putting all their green funds, because they are under pressure also from their shareholders to put more money into climate-friendly investments. Mostly it's directed towards the developed countries, because there is a feeling. So how do you do that? How do you communicate that? And the third part is then how do you create actually a sort of a framework, an institutional model, a contracting system where all this can work. And there, I believe one of our best opportunities are using all the advances in the digital revolution.
Okay.
The fact that we've got blockchain, we've got so many other things happening now. And the most fascinating thing is that today what's happening is that there's a satellite called the Sentinel satellite, which is recording the carbon and methane in every pixel of the world. For every 2 square kilometers, it's recording on a real-time basis. And this is available to anyone. It's available as an open resource. So we actually can take the data for a mayor and show him or her that, Miss Mayor, in your city, this is the amount of methane which has been generated yesterday. This is the amount today.
Okay.
And these are reasonably, they're not, obviously, you have to do the ground truthing, but it's a very effective way of communicating the messages. So to answer your question, yes, there's a lot which has to be done. A lot has to be done actually through these kinds of discussions we are having, so that the anyone who's viewing it also does a Google and checks out on what's going on this whole idea about the carbon footprint. But I gave you the example of waste. The renewable energy is another one with a huge opportunity. In fact, the way they are working it out in cities today is that as you know, most of the transport, public transport, have these bus depots with very large rooftops. So the idea is that you use all your rooftops to generate solar power, but still storage is expensive. But you can use it in such a way that you recharge the electric buses after you sort of replace the entire bus fleet, and then you can basically reduce the carbon footprint from transportation. Along with that, you have to do some other things. For example, uh, basically creating streets to be more pedestrian friendly. You need planners to do that. You need to have what some cities are doing as bus rapid transit, which is improving the bus service so that it functions almost like a metro train. It
Yeah.
has a dedicated lane in which people can go and ride it comfortably rather than using their two-wheelers or cars. But it does require a huge amount of behavioral change, because we still like to, if you're rich enough to have a car, or even if you have a two-wheeler, you like the independence and don't want to rely on someone else's transportation. So there's still huge challenges there. The transport is more complicated. The carbon footprint, to acquire funding for the carbon footprint, is probably more difficult. Waste and renewable energy is easier. And the other great area also where there are great opportunities, especially in colder climates, is in energy efficiency.
In heating.
Because yes, heating in particular has huge opportunities of reducing the fossil fuel
Yeah.
input and actually making it easier.
Yeah.
So we are at the stage now of, we're just starting. I mean, I don't think we've even reached the base camp in this whole thing. But the first part is the communication of the message, the creation of the awareness. The second part is that each city then figures out, based on its own, what it considers to be its portfolio of activities which have a carbon footprint, which one is politically easier to tackle. I would say, based on my own experience, probably waste is the easiest, because everyone wins in that. But there could be others. It could be renewable energy may be easier. And in fact, what we are finding, one of the very interesting things happening is that, and in fact, Subodh, you pointed me out also on this, that in some of the countries with very bad governance, where the power grid doesn't function, uh, actually what is called distributed generation, that is, you have a small renewable energy system which is only powering maybe one building or a small community,
Right.
is not only climate friendly, but actually is probably in the long term, a much better solution than investing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars building the old style heavy infrastructure. So, this could be a great opportunity in countries where people are, they may have electricity, but the power cuts are so big that they never get the power when they want it. It may be a completely revolutionizing the way we do our, infrastructure for, especially for electricity. So that's another area where there are possibilities. But I think the important message in all this is that yes, there are exciting possibilities, but there are responsibilities. It's not that the global community is going to write a check and give it because you can achieve it. These are all based on achieving measurable outcomes, because here the accountability is not about writing a check to someone, but to see whether your carbon footprint has actually gone down. And now we have methods of measuring. So it cannot be, I mean, once you put the system in, and let's say a city commits that they're going to reduce their methane footprint by 10% a year, through both global satellites and sensors, it can be monitored. And next year, if they don't achieve it, they'll just lose their money.
Okay,
They
that's
won't
right.
get any.
Yeah, that sounds right. Opportunity and responsibility. I like that phrase. Opportunity and responsibility with accountability. Good. Okay, Vijay, thank you so much for this very comprehensive statement of the exciting opportunities. We are all afraid of climate change. But what you're saying is that, listen, we can live with it and we can win also, right? It's not something that we have to be scared of. In the cities, there are options and possibilities to do better and to actually reduce the problem of climate change through the measures that you have suggested. And that the old method, I mean, both you and I are very familiar with the World Bank. That model is not going to work because the amount of money needed is in trillions. The World Bank talks billions. Billions won't cut it. We need to have much, much more money. And this can only flow from private investors, right? This is the way that we have to work. And getting money from the private investors is a different proposition than getting money from the World Bank. So the World Bank model, the World Bank may still lead and other institutions may still need, but the money is not going to come from them. The money is going to come from elsewhere. I think that is my summary of your very exciting message. And if you have something else to add, let's do it. And then we can end this today.
Thank you, Subodh. That is a good summary of what I was saying. And thank you all for participating in this meeting.
Okay.
Joining later. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say bye to the viewers. And next week, tomorrow or day after, I'll be back with another distinguished person to give us his or her message. Till then, bye-bye.